The people in the house were all brought into the living room house, tied up.
And he handed me a knife and he said, do something.
Okay, welcome back to the 2S Horror Quarters podcast, Ghost of LA edition. Today we're going to cover the murders of Sharon Tate and her company at 10050 CIELO Drive on the night of August 8th into the early morning of August 9th, 1969. Of course, the official murders took place August 9th, 1969. We will also cover the murders of Rosemary and Leno LaBianca on the night of August 9th into the early morning of August 10th, 1969. The official murders on the LaBiancas were August 10th, 1969. The reason why I'm including the night before on each murder is because that's when these murders culminated and were already in progress as far as the planning of it and so forth. So there's a vast amount of information regarding this case over the years. Helter Skelter is the go-to book regarding this case by Vincent Bugliosi. It covers the murders before and after the trial. Mr. Bugliosi is who tried Manson and crew. His book is very detailed, and this is what I will go through. This is what I referred to give you these facts, timelines, and any other kind of vital information regarding these two nights. Now, I do know Helter Skelter has its problems and issues with its critics in regards to certain points of information or certain theories involved. But as dearly departed's Scott Michaels put it on Movie Geeks United when he was talking about Helter Skelter, the book, he said, Helter Skelter is the truth of the trial. And that's fair. So beginning with the murders that took place at 10050 CIELO Drive on the morning of August 9th, the housekeeper, Mrs. Winifred Chapman, was dropped off at the bus stop at Santa Monica and Canyon. And just before she was going to hail a taxi, she saw somebody she knew. The gentleman took her up to the house, and she was dropped off at the front gate. Immediately as she approached the gate, she noticed that the wire was cut off the pole and hanging over the gate itself. Mrs. Chapman thought that initially it was power lines cut and that the power was out, but the gate did open for her. She grabbed the LA Times in the mailbox, and about 30 feet in front of the gate as she entered the grounds, there was a white vehicle, a white Rambler, parked kind of weird, kind of out of place. She passed it, didn't see anything out of place there, just thought it was a car parked oddly. What she did notice was there was an outside garage light that was still on, which was a little odd to her because it was still on and it's usually turned off. So she went to the garage, turned off the light. So Mrs. Chapman never enters through the front door. There's a service porch, and above the doorway to the service porch was a key that's hidden on the ledge. So she reached up, grabbed the key, and entered in through the kitchen. As she walked in, she checked the phone line and found out it was dead. And she made her way through the living room and came across these two blue steamer trunks. One of them looked like it had been knocked over, but they were right in her way. She knew that the trunks weren't there the night before, so again, something else that was a little odd to her. Now from that point, she can see that there was blood on the trunks, blood on the floor next to the trunks, and blood on some towels on the floor next to that. Throughout the living room, there were red splashes of blood scattered sporadically. The front door was ajar. There were pools of blood on the front porch. And from a distance, she could see one body on the lawn. Now she was frantic. She bolted out of the house and came across that white Rambler on her way to exit the premises. And now she can see that there was a male, dead, slumped over inside of the white Rambler. And now she's freaking out. So she runs past the gates. Upon exiting the gate, she comes to the first house on the right, the first neighbor, a 10070 CIELO Drive. And this was the home of Mr. and Mrs. Cott, Seymour Cott. And she's frantically ringing the doorbell, knocking, no answer. She's screaming, murder, death, bodies, blood. Being that there was no answer there, she continued on to the neighbor's house past that at 10090 CIELO Drive, and that would be the home of the Asons. The 15-year-old son that lived there, Jim Asen, was outside warming up his father's car. His father was going to drop him off at the police station where he was working some type of volunteer work, where he was working the front desk, answering phones. Being that she was frantic, Jim's parents came out and tried to calm her. Jim's father called it in at 8:33 a.m. That was the first call. So at that point, Jim and his father, Ray, took a walk to the gate. They looked through the gate and they could see the Rambler. They couldn't see anything inside of it, and of course they could see the cut phone lines. Now, the first arriving officer was an Officer DeRosa. DeRosa was trying to calm Mrs. Chapman, and while doing so, he talked to Ray Asen. Ray Asen told him that the house was owned by a Rudy Altobelli. Now, Rudy Altobelli had a caretaker that usually stayed there, lived there, William Garretson. Mr. Asen let Officer DeRosa know that the famous movie director Roman Polanski rented out the main house, and his wife Sharon Tate lived there. Sharon Tate was 8 months pregnant at the time. Now, originally, Sharon Tate and her husband Roman were in Europe for a while, and while they were in Europe, an Abigail Folger and a VOYTEK Frykowski were staying there. They were a couple. Abigail was one of the heirs to Folger's Coffee. So, after a while, Sharon came back from Europe, and VOYTEK Frykowski and Abigail Folger ended up just staying there at the house with Sharon, because she was pregnant and they didn't want to leave her alone. So at the time, it was the three of them living there. So now it starts to get a little more interesting as the seconds click away. Mrs. Chapman was unable to identify the bodies. She was pretty distraught. But she did make mention of the black Porsche that was in the driveway belonging to a Jay Sebring. Jay Sebring was a hairstylist to the stars at that time. A famous guy, pretty renowned, and a former lover of Sharon Tate's. But he was there hanging out, and she noticed and told police that his black Porsche was in the driveway. At this point, DeRosa grabs his rifle, heads to the gate with Mrs. Chapman just so she can open it up for him, and he enters. As he passes the Rambler, he takes a look inside and sees a male Caucasian slumped over towards the passenger side of the vehicle. He appeared to be a teen and soaked in blood. At this time, the second officer rolls in, an Officer Wisenhunt. DeRosa informs and updates Wisenhunt on what's going on. The two of them both have shotguns now and re-enter the premises. They approach the Rambler, take another look at it, makes note that the window is down, the driver's side window. A third officer rolls up, an Officer Burbridge, and he catches up with them. Now all three officers are armed and on the premises. So just past the gate was the parking area, and there is the garage with the porch light that was on. Just past the garage, you enter the lawn area if you're walking parallel to the home. So on the parking area side of the walkway to the front entrance, there was a wishing well, and as you cross that walkway, you're back on the lawn. Then past the house itself is the swimming pool. Sharon Tate's master bedroom led out to the swimming pool area, and just past that is the guest house. Now in front of the lawn itself was a split rail fence that had Christmas lights on it, and they were on pretty much every night. Those lights were put up by Candace Bergen when she lived there with Terry Melcher. And in front of the split rail fence there was like a little slope, probably 6 to 8 feet downward, that led to a walkway, and that walkway led from the guest house back to the parking lot. So that was pretty much the layout of the front grounds of the house. From a distance, they spot two bodies on the lawn. The bodies look out of place. They kind of look like mannequins laid out, soaked in red paint, but they look obscure and extremely out of place. Now about 20 feet past the front door lay the first body, one VOYTEK Frykowski. He was lying on his side and resting on his right arm, face horribly battered, torso and body had been punctured. Bell bottoms, short boots, purple shirt, and casual vest. 25 feet past VOYTEK was Abigail Folger. She was lying on her back, arms thrown out and barefoot, and was in a nightgown. At this point, Wisenhunt and Burbage went for the house looking for a safe way in. Noticing a screen popped off and leaning against the house, the two officers found another way in. Now reading directly from Helter Skelter, Wisenhunt also observed a horizontal slit along the bottom of the screen. Suspecting this might have been where the killer or killers entered, they looked for another means of entry. They found a window open on the side. Looking in, they saw what appeared to be a newly painted room devoid of furniture. They climbed in. DeRosa waited until he saw them inside of the house, then approached the front door. There was a patch of blood on the walk between the hedges, several more on the right side corner of the porch, with still others just outside and to the left of the door and on the door jamb itself. The door being open inward, DeRosa was on the porch before he noticed that something had been scrawled on its lower half. Painted in what appeared to be blood were 3 letters. There's a famous picture of Roman Polanski after the murders coming to visit the site, and he's sitting next to that door, and it's pretty traumatizing to see, to imagine the pain that he must have been feeling there, considering what was lost, who was lost. Now, DeRosa does a sweep of the house, and he comes across the same steamer trunks that Winifred Chapman came across when she first entered the service porch. Now, on the floor next to the steam trunks were some horned rim glasses. Officer Burbridge finds some pieces of broken wood, which to him looked like pieces of a broken gun grip, so he made note of that. Now, going in deeper to the premises, into the living room, facing the fireplace was a long white couch, and it had an American flag draped over the back of it. On the other side of the couch was Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring. She was young, blonde, and very pregnant. She was laying on her left side in a fetal position, wearing matching flowered bra and bikini panties. There was a white nylon rope wrapped around her neck twice, then ran over the rafters, tied to the body of a man who was on the other side, not too far away from her, and this was Jay Sebring. The rope wrapped his neck twice as well, and a bloody towel covered his face. He was 5'6". His hands were up to his face as if he had been warding off an attack. Blue shirt, white pants, black vertical stripes, black boots, and he was drenched in blood. There was a wooden ladder that led to a loft above the living room. DeRosa climbed that ladder expecting to see more carnage. Nothing was there, but he had to check. Now, searching the rest of the house, he found one of the bedrooms down the hallway had clothes thrown about. Pillows and a blanket were rumpled. Now, to them, they deducted that possibly the woman in the nightgown out on the lawn occupied this room. Across the hall was a master, a longer bed. There was a blood smudge on the inside left of the French doors coming out of that room, leading to the swimming pool outside. From that, they deducted that this was a possible escape route from one of the victims, and that's how the blood got there. As the officers approached the guest house that Mr. Asen told them about, they not only heard a dog barking, but they heard a male voice saying, "Shh, keep it down," or "Shh, be quiet." Considering the scene and everything that was going on and how many bodies were found, this was huge. They carefully peeked through the windows, and through the windows they can see what looked like to be an 18-year-old male with his shirt off, jeans on, listening to some music. And DeRosa kicks in the door. There was a dog in there, and that was Rudy Altabelli's dog. It was a Warmer Rainer. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. But the dog was being cared for by this caretaker. When they busted through the door, this dog started chomping on Wisenhunt's barrel of his shotgun, so they had to pin the dog between the door to get him to calm down. When the officers brought out William Garrettson out onto the lawn, he was so distraught that he misidentified the victims. He thought one of them was Winifred Chapman and the other one was Roman Polanski. So, this didn't help him out in the eyes of the officers. A guy that was there, 5 people dead, he hears nothing, sees nothing, and he's maybe 50 feet away, 60 feet away from the main residence. So this just doesn't look right, so they haul him in. As we all know, Mr. Garrettson was cleared, but for that first few weeks, it was hell for him, and probably throughout life. I mean, this is a traumatizing event. It was finally confirmed he had nothing to do with anything, but it weighed on Mr. Garrettson for years on, and he was quoted as saying, "How come I wasn't murdered?" And it was survivor's guilt that really weighed on him. So 10050 Cielo Drive was complete carnage, just a massacre. 5 victims up in this ritzy area, overlooking Los Angeles, essentially, and one of the better views, arguably the best view in town of the city, where things like this just don't happen. And here it is, out of a horror movie, happening. 6 victims, because I count Paul, the unborn child of Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. 6 victims. You got Sharon Tate, her son Paul, Jay Sebring, VOYTEK Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and Stephen Parent, which is a tragic story on its own, which we'll get into a little later about Stephen Parent's story. And I think he's one of the overlooked victims. Of course, we all count him as far as being a victim that night, but because of where he was and the company that was also on that premises, he's kind of forgotten. And I just want to make sure we remember him. And like I said, we'll cover Stephen Parent a little later on. So now we're going to move into the timeline of the day, the last day the victims at 10050 Cielo Drive were alive. Based on the investigation, I'm going to go down the list here so we kind of get an idea of what happened in and around that area, in and around that residence the day before. So at 8 a.m., Mrs. Chapman arrived at Cielo, and she did the dishes. She did her usual cleaning duties. 8:30 a.m., Frank Guerrero arrived. Now, he was a painter who was painting the nursery, getting it ready for the child that was due probably in less than a month. In doing so, he removed the screens to air out the room after the paint. At 11 a.m., Roman Polanski called and spoke with Sharon, and according to Mrs. Chapman, the phone call kind of spoke about Sharon was kind of worried that Roman wouldn't be back in time for his birthday, which was, I believe, the 12th of August. Another phone call came in about a neighbor's kitten that was roaming around, and Sharon told the neighbor that now she's got the kitten there and she's feeding the kitten. It's reported that Sharon was taking care of, in total, 26 cats. Terry Melcher apparently had some cats up there when he moved out that stayed and became a group of like 26 cats. And there were also 2 dogs that Sharon was looking after. Mrs. Chapman also noted that during the heat, that Sharon Tate's attire was usually just bra and panties because it was so hot, because she was uncomfortable being pregnant, walking around in that heat. Just before noon on August 8th, 1969, that same day, Mrs. Chapman washed down the paw prints at the front door. Now we're going to get back to Stephen Parent a little bit, who lived in El Monte. He had lunch at home around that time. Now, he had 2 jobs. His first job was at a plumbing supply. His second job was at a stereo shop. So he came home. He had lunch at home. And he asked his mom to lay out his clothes for him so he can, when he's done with his first job, he can just change real quick, head to the second job. Now, back on Cielo Drive, about 12:30, 2 of Sharon's friends, a Joanna Pettit and a Barbara Lewis, stopped by for lunch to hang out. At 1 p.m., Sandy Tennant called, a friend of Sharon's. Sharon invited her to stop by. Sandy declined for whatever reason. Rudy Altobelli had 2 gardeners that would come to the house and take care of the gardening duties. Around 1 p.m., the first guy came, David Martinez. He entered the premises, and so did Abigail Folger and VOYTEK Frykowski. They were coming in as well. The painter, Frank Guerrero, he finished the first coat around 1:30, and he left the screens off. Now, about 2 p.m., Abigail Folger visits the bike shop on Santa Monica Boulevard. According to Dennis Hurst, during the trial, she was actually exchanging a bike that she had previously purchased, and that newly exchanged bike was the bike that was to be delivered that night to 10050 CIELO Drive. And so here's the stuff that I get caught up on here, the bike shop here, where the location of the bike shop. Now, it's been noted that the bike shop was on the southeast corner of Little Santa Monica Boulevard and Camden Drive. And what I found here, the southeast corner of South Santa Monica Boulevard and Camden was the original bike shop. At 3 p.m., the second gardener arrived, a Tom Vargas. Now, as Tom arrived, Abigail was leaving in her Camaro, separately from WOYTEK Frykowski, who was leaving in his Firebird. So they passed each other at the gate. Now, doing some more research on this, shout out to MansonBlog.com, I found out that there was an error as far as what car that Abigail Folger was driving. It appears that Abigail Folger's car was a 1968 Pontiac Firebird 400. So thank you, MansonBlog.com, for pointing that out. Joanna Pettit and Barbara Lewis leave CIELO around that time. Now, roughly around this same time, Jay Sebring, who was at home, not too far away, his butler reported serving breakfast to Jay and his female companion. At 3:45, Jay Sebring called Sharon Tate and let her know that he would be arriving at her residence sooner than he thought he would be, but he would be there. Just after the call with Jay Sebring, Mrs. Chapman informed Sharon that she was done with her duties. Now, another twist of fate here, which is good for Winifred Chapman, is that Sharon offered to have Winifred just stay the night because it was so hot, and Winifred declined. And obviously, if she would have stayed, we know what would have happened. So that was fortunate for Winifred, relatively speaking. So David Martinez was leaving, and as he was leaving, he took Winifred Chapman either back to the bus stop or home. Tom Vargas remained behind. Now, he reported to the police that he was working near the house and he saw Sharon was asleep through the window. So when the delivery guy came with the 2 steamer trunks, the blue ones, Mr. Vargas signed for him. The signature on that receipt was 4:30 p.m. At 4:45, before Vargas left the residence, he went to the guest house to talk to William Garrettson, and he asked William to do some extra watering over the weekend because it was going to be extremely hot. Now, back in El Monte, back to Stephen Parent, he got home around this same time. He changed his clothes and he waved bye to his mom, and he left for a second job. Between 5:30 and 6 p.m., we're getting closer to the murders now. A woman by the name of Terry Kay was backing out of her driveway at 9845 Easton Drive and saw Jay Sebring pass by in his black Porsche. So we can deduct that Jay Sebring arrived at the CIELO residence somewhere around that time, probably just after 6. Now, another twist of fate is between 6 and 6:30, Sharon Tate's younger sister, Debbie Tate, she was 13 at the time, she called and asked her sister if she can stop by tonight with some friends. And Sharon Tate told her sister, no, not tonight. We'll do it another time. Between 7:30 and 8 p.m., Dennis Hurst was the delivery driver that brought the bicycle to the residence that Abigail purchased. Now, during the investigation, Mr. Hurst identified through photos that it was Jay Sebring who answered the door to take the delivery of the bicycle, and that Mr. Hurst didn't see anyone else there at that time, just Jay Sebring at the front door. So we do know that Jay Sebring was at CIELO between 7:30 and 8. So according to Helter Skelter, it was roughly 2 p.m. that Abigail and WOYTEK were at the bicycle shop. However, I come across a great podcast by Movie Geeks United. It's called August 69, and this particular episode is episode 3, The Delivery Man. This is from Dennis Hurst. It's 50 years later. This was recorded in 2019, and I want to thank Movie Geeks United for letting me use this. So take a listen as he recounts what happened that night.
Came into the shop, I don't know, it was like maybe 5:30 or something. And I said, hey, Dad, can I have the van tonight take Janice out to a movie for my birthday? And he said, yeah, but, and I can ride my bicycle home. It's about 5 miles up the canyon to the house. And my dad often rode the bicycle. In fact, he looked for an opportunity to ride the bike, so he was happy to give me the van. But he said, you have to make a delivery. And I made lots of deliveries. And, but you can't deliver it now on the way up the canyon because they're going to be out to dinner. And so you have to deliver it after 7:30. Yeah, he said, yeah, on Wednesday, somebody was in the bike shop and they bought a Raleigh Superb or whatever it was. And I delivered it that night, Wednesday night. Then they called this morning and said, no, we don't want the green one, we want the blue one. So I need you to drive up there and drop off the blue bike and pick up the green bike. Now, it's a little bit tricky because the address is CIELO, but it's actually off of Angelo. And so what you have to do is, go up and then just turn up, and it looks like a long driveway. There's a few homes on it. And then when you get to the gate, just feel around in that bush. There's a button. Just push that button, and the gate will open. And I said, okay. So I went home, showered, changed, and I don't know, around 7:30, maybe it was 7:15, maybe it was 7:45, so somewhere around there. And my brother Michael had also been to that house when Rudy Altobelli lived there 2 years earlier. He's the one who rented the house to Terry Melcher. And so there was, and I think maybe my brother said, oh, yeah, I know that place. Or maybe he told me the story later or whatever. Oh, yeah, I know that place because that's where I got the kinkajou. And so anyway, so my dad gave me the directions. I went home, showered, changed, and in the early evening, it was August, so it was still daylight, I made the delivery. And I remember distinctly driving in, and when I delivered a lot of these estates in Beverly Hills, Bel Air, whatever, there would be some kind of a pressure plate, or like at the gas station, that little black cord that went across, you drive across it, it would close the gate behind you. So I looked carefully around to make sure I drove over it to close the gate, but there was nothing there on the driveway. And I just noticed in my mirror that a minute later the gate just closed, so it was a cheaper addition. And so I went to the garage. The garage door was open. I picked up the green bike, delivered the blue bike, and then I went around, if you're familiar with the property, I went around to the little front gate by the little wishing well, and then the flagstone stairs to the porch, the front door, rang the doorbell, and a gentleman answered the door. I found out later it was Jay Sebring. And he had a bottle in his hand, like a green glass bottle, like a Spinata or, I don't know, some kind of a inexpensive wine-type small bottle drink. And I said, yeah, I'm from the bike shop. I just want to let you know I picked up the bike, dropped off the bike. It's in the garage, whatever. The instruction cards are on it and everything else. And he said, okay, thank you, whatever. I mean, we barely exchanged 25 or 50 words. And then I left.
So on August 9th, Mr. and Mrs. LaBianca drove up to Lake Isabella to not only pick up the boat that they left there for Frank and Susan, who were Rosemary's children from a previous relationship. So they drove up to Lake Isabella to retrieve the boat and bring back Frank. Now, Frank, who was having so much fun, begged to stay, and they let him stay. So Mr. and Mrs. LaBianca and Susan drove home with boat in tow without Frank. Now, on August 10th, just after 1 a.m., the LaBiancas dropped off Susan at her apartment on Greenwood Place. So here we are at the El Pueblo Apartments at 4616 Greenwood Place in LA. This is where Susan Struthers lived and was dropped off by the LaBiancas that night in 1969. This apartment building is also used as the exterior for the apartments in Melrose Place. In case it looks familiar to anyone, that's where it's from. And from there they stopped at a newsstand located on Hillhurst and Franklin. The owner of the newsstand was a John Fokianos, and he recognized Leno's Thunderbird with boat in tow as it U-turned around and pulled up in front of his newsstand. Here we are at the corner of Hillhurst and Franklin, where the LaBiancas stopped to pick up that newspaper from Mr. Fokianos. And I spoke to him about the murders on the previous night on CIELO Drive. And this here was the last point of contact, outside of the killers, of course, that the LaBiancas had with anyone else. Mr. Fokianos, he said that, during the investigation, he said that the couple looked tired, but they did have small talk about what was front page news, and that was the Tate murders. And that Mrs. LaBianca looked kind of worried about it, frightened, That's a huge murder. It's a huge, gruesome murder that happened in town. So I could imagine at 1 a.m. hearing this type of news and going home is, wasn't a good feeling. So Mr. Fokianos was probably the last person to see them alive outside of their killers. Now we're into August 10th, 1969. Frank is dropped off by whoever he was with coming back from Lake Isabella at about 8:30 p.m. The first thing that Frank notices is Leno's Thunderbird and boat still parked out on the street, which is way out of character because he knows Leno would have parked it by now, So he takes his luggage up the long driveway. If you haven't been there or haven't seen the pictures, it's a long driveway up to the main house. Frank stows his luggage and stuff in the garage, and he goes around to the back door of the home. And he notices right away something was out of place because the shades were down, and they really were never down. The kitchen light was on. Frank knocked a few times. He called out a few times, no answer. So he took a walk, which it wasn't, I've been there, it wasn't a short walk to me. I mean, it was down a pretty long street, but there was a burger stand in the area on the corner of Hyperion and Rowena. Now, Frank used the payphone there to try to reach his sister, Susan. He called the restaurant she was working at. And the manager got on the phone and said she was off that day. But if you give me the number to your payphone, let me call your sister and have her call you. And that's what happened. Susan called the payphone, in which Frank relayed the news to her about what he saw at the house. Susan said, just wait there. So here we are at the LaBianca residence at what was 3301 Waverly Drive. And you really can't get a great shot of the house now with the trees and the gate and everything, but you can see the long driveway. This part over here to the right, this additional driveway with the parking area, that's been added on. I was able to include the actual sound of the neighborhood during this time in the morning. I know it's been over 50 years, but where this house sits, it's extremely quiet even at 8:30 in the morning or whatever time it was. Okay, based on the research that I did, I haven't been able to confirm this yet, but it makes the most sense that Frank, when he did take the walk, it was the street called St. George. That's right down his driveway and to the left. It's a long street, but I estimate that this is the street he walked down to get to the corner of Rowena and Hyperion to what was then a Charburger. Here we are in front of it. It's a Mixto restaurant now. I believe the payphone sat right about here. And this is the area where he did use the phone. Another little tidbit here is the telephone pole directly in front of Mixto has two marker nails on it. The one on the left represents the height of the pole, which is 55 feet, which puts it about 7.5 feet in the ground. The marker nail to the right, 61, is the year the pole was put in. So this pole right here was here then. So at 9:30 p.m. approximately, Susan and her boyfriend Joe Dorgan picked up Frank at that payphone, and they drove to the house on Waverly. Now, in Helter Skelter, it said they opened the door with a set of keys that Rosemary left in her car, but it's also noted in the book that since no one tried opening the door before the keys were retrieved, we don't know whether it was locked previously. Dorgan told Susan to stay in the kitchen while he and Frank checked the house out, and they find Leno first. He was sprawled out on his back, a throw pillow over his head, and there was a cord around his neck and something protruding from his stomach. So Joe picked up the kitchen phone and then put it down because he feared that he would ruin evidence. He told Susan everything is okay and let's get out of here as they rushed out of the house. Across the street, there was a duplex, and it appears to be still a duplex. I know the structure's still there at 3308 Waverly. They went knocking on the door across the street there, and naturally the people that were living there were like, we'll call for you, but we're not going to let you in. So during that commotion, as the residents at 3308 were telling Joe, hey, we'll call for you, but we're not going to let you in, Joe went right next door to 3306, and the Brigham couple let him use the phone, and he was able to call the police at that point. Approximately 10:40 to 10:42, two officers arrived, a W.C. Rodriguez and a J.C. Tony, and they entered the premises with Joe. Susan and Frank stayed across the street. Once Rodriguez saw the scene, he immediately called backup, called a supervisor, called for an ambulance. And what he found was, in addition to the pillow that Joe and Frank had seen, there was a bloody pillowcase over Mr. LaBianca's head. The cord around his neck was attached to a nearby lamp. His hands were tied with a leather thong behind his back. And there was an ivory-handled carving fork that was plunged into his stomach. Someone carved war into his belly. In the other room, Rosemary was lying face down on the bedroom floor, parallel to the bed and dresser, in a large pool of blood. She had on a short pink nightgown with an expensive dress over that. Both garments were bunched over her head and exposed pretty much her complete backside, and an extreme amount of stab wounds. Her hands weren't tied, but a pillowcase was over her head and a lamp cord was around her neck. And based on the tautness of the cord, officers deducted that she still tried to crawl as it was wrapped around her neck because the cord itself was tight. And 2 feet away from that was a second pool of blood. Going through the house, everyone's seen what was written on the walls and on the refrigerator, but a more precise look at that was that on the north wall in the living room, "Death to Pigs" was written in blood. On the south wall left of the front door read "Rise." And on the refrigerator door, "Helter Skelter" was written. Now, it wasn't spelled Helter, it was Healter, Helter Skelter. I'm going to guess that it was just misspelled. I don't think there was any intentional motive there to write it that way. That's just my guess. And that was an extremely brutal scene. Now, not as brutal as the one on CIELO, considering there was 2.5 times more victims. But even with these murders happening back-to-back nights, police and authorities still didn't think to connect the two at this point. What we do know about the CIELO murders is as follows. We do know it was an extremely quiet night, but they first drove the car up CIELO off of Benedict Canyon. Now, there were 4 people inside of that vehicle that night. Linda Kasabian, then they had Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel. They drove up, Tex cuts the phone line, and presumably they back straight down because it's extremely narrow going up that private drive there. Now, in this shot here from lsb3.com, you can see, if you're approaching the gate from CIELO to enter the premises, you can see the telephone wire coming across there, and that's just another reference point. You can see it's cutting across the road there to the pole on the left-hand side as you approach the gate. And here's another shot of investigators pointing up at the pole. So here you can see the steps that are on the pole, steps or pegs, I call them steps. And they're so you don't have to climb them with your gaffs, depending on where the pole is positioned. But at any rate, the idea is you can't just grab the steps from ground level. You either got to stand on something or get a ladder, or even use your hooks to climb up there to grab the steps. So that's how he was able to access the wires to cut, by climbing those steps there. So in this shot here, the camera is actually on the premises of 10050, looking out of the gate. So you can see on the right there where the original pole stood on the right hand side. So if you're coming up CIELO, approaching the gate, the original pole that Tex climbed was on the left, and you can see the direction of where the wires laid. Now as you approach the gate on CIELO, the pole is to the right, which that's not the original pole, nor is it where the original pole sat. Now here we went up CIELO Drive, and it didn't turn out too good. We got honked at and cursed out, and you know, that's fair. We really shouldn't be up there. It's extremely narrow. It's people's homes and pretty much essentially a driveway, so I wouldn't recommend going up there, at least for me again. But I just wanted to get a good shot of the gate. This is the best one that I could come up with.